What's that?
This is in the agenda.
It is, yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, we're live and we're hit record and we are ready to start. Excuse me, this is probably the first time. All right. Well, good evening, members of the board, residents. I see some members of our actual zoning task force here as well. Good evening. My name is Chris Himes, I'm the New Garden Township Manager, and tonight this is one of not one, not two, but four, I guess, individual public outreach meetings that we're planning along the way for what we've been discussing in the past, which is essentially a zoning project planned update for the township in conference with a zoning consultant that was done through the RFP process to procure a consultant to kind of help guide us through this kind of very, I'll call it heavily intensive public process over the course of an 18-month period. So we're doing all of our due diligence, and this is essentially just meeting number one. So with us tonight as a representative from Michael Baker International, which was the identified, approved, I call it winner, if you will, of the RFP process for the township. Her name is Samantha McLean. She's here tonight to essentially kick off the actual process that the township's going to be going forward with. So think of it as like a kind of like a LAYS course to understanding what is zoning, kind of what we're going through as a township, and then have essentially kind of a pretty brief plan presentation, about 25 minutes or so, and leaving the rest of the hour for Q&A from the public, as well as the board comments if you have any as well. And then trying to kind of keep at that like 6:55-ish type time frame, which was carved off enough time for this meeting today before we start our normal monthly board of supervisor meeting at 7 o'clock. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Samantha. And just for everyone's update, this is being recorded. It's also being live streamed to the township YouTube page, so you can always reach back into this for meeting material information, as well as this exact presentation is available for public access on the actual agenda packet, which is posted to our website as well. And of course, I think we also have all of this uploaded to the independent website that we also have as well. So no lack of transparency in this as well. So Samantha, without further ado, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. As Chris said, my name is Samantha McLean. I am the project manager for the New Garden Township zoning update from Michael Baker International. But I'm assisted by a team of other planners who work with zoning codes across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Right now, we're working on just, to name a few, one in Upper Dublin Township in Montgomery County. We have one in Upper McCunchie Township up in the Lehigh Valley, a few in Central PA. So we get to see a lot of different communities and work to make sure that we're meeting the needs of each one while staying consistent with the municipality's planning code, which is the overarching code that gives townships like New Garden the ability to manage land use through zoning. So we're looking forward to working with you all. Chris, next slide, please. So tonight we'll be going over what is zoning, why is New Garden Township updating the zoning, what's the process like. We also want to hear from you. So what are some of your priorities? This is just the first of many opportunities to do so. And then finally, how can you stay involved throughout this process? So really it's kind of three things we want to accomplish. We want to share information, we want to provide kind of a baseline about zoning, and then we want to hear from you. Next slide. So we're going to do something a little interactive. We're going to try it out. If you have your phones and are comfortable using it, if you wouldn't mind going to menti.com and then putting in the code 2484-6072, and I'll repeat that. So it's 2484-6072. And if you don't want to use your phones, I'm also happy for just, verbal participation as well. So I want to learn a little bit more about who's in the room with us and why you're here tonight. It's great to see so many people. So how many people are here just to learn more about the update and the update process? You can raise your hand or put it in Menti. Okay, handful. Are there those of you in the room that might have a specific concern about zoning that you want to see kind of addressed throughout this process? Anyone? Another? Okay. It seems like a lot of you are just generally interested in the future of the township. Other people agree with that? Is that what brought you out tonight? So you can raise your hand. Okay. And then there's an other option. If the person that chose other, or if there's another reason you're here tonight, would you mind sharing? Great, thank you. And this helps us just understand kind of also how to make sure that we're giving you the information that you want to hear and that we're keeping you updated on your interests. So thanks for being here. Another quick question. What's your interest and background in zoning? Would you say that you have a solid understanding of zoning? Okay, so if you raise your hand if you have a solid understanding of zoning. Okay, a couple. What about like medium level? Like you kind of get it, but maybe not in the weeds. Okay. And then what about the zoning newbies, the novices in the room? Anyone kind of, okay. It seems like a lot of people are interested in learning about zoning. So that's great. For those of you that are experts and kind of know a little bit, some of the information we might go over tonight might seem really basic, but once again, this will be posted online for all of your other neighbors to see. So we just wanted to start with the basics, but it's good to know for future kind of educational material creation. So what is zoning? Zoning has a few purposes. First and foremost, it works or helps the township protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. It does this through regulating the size, location, and use of buildings. The zoning code also sets clear expectations for property owners about what they can do on their properties, but also what to expect in the properties that surround them. It also is a reflection of the township's plans. So the comprehensive plan, which New Garden somewhat recently updated. The zoning ordinance is a way to codify kind of the vision and recommendations in that plan and a set of objectives that were established during that process. So it divides districts or divides the township into districts, and each of those districts have their own set of standards within the zoning regulations. So this is the current zoning map of New Garden Township. So you'll see there are residential districts, the airport development zone, business park, commercial industrial areas. So within each of those, there are a set of regulations that are unique to kind of what is desired in that area. So it's not necessarily what is there, but what the township wants to see is there. So we're looking to the future. So this is just the existing map. So within those standards and regulations, it regulates use. Typically, there are two types of uses: a principal use, so that's the primary use on the property, what the parcel is being used for. Sometimes it's just a single use, like a residential use or a commercial use. However, kind of in your comp plan, there's a lot of talk about mixed use, especially kind of in your village center and then Toughkenamon. So in some cases, there might be a mix of uses on a property that are the principal uses. And then there are also accessory uses. So those can be things like maybe an accessory dwelling unit, another residential unit on the same parcel as a primary single family residential unit. Or it can be something like parking, right? So parking is a type of use and we want to make sure that we regulate it. So the location of it, how much of it, the look and feel of it as well. So we're talking principal uses and accessory uses. Zoning also regulates the bulk of the structure or building. So size, shape, and placement. Where they can be placed on a lot and how tall the buildings and structures can be. The location of the building on the lot is determined by setbacks. So your front setback, the distance from your lot line to your building, your side setbacks, side yard setbacks from your building to your side yard property line, and then your rear yard setbacks are from your building or your structure to your rear lot line. So that's one way that zoning helps regulate kind of what happens on the lot. It also regulates size of lots, so minimum lot sizes, or in some cases, maximum lot sizes. It can also go into, and I'm not expecting you to read everything on this, it's just to kind of illustrate that it can also go into a lot more detail depending on the needs of the district. So a lot of times we see in some commercial districts or mixed use districts, municipalities want to see a little bit more detail about what that bulk looks like, not just the height, but what's the look and feel, kind of like the design of those structures. So zoning can regulate massing and the articulation of that. So making sure that there's like a base, a middle, and a articulated roof line. It can also regulate things like transparency on the ground floor. So if you're trying to get a retail mixed use district up and going, you want people walking, you want to have more transparency, more windows on the ground floor. That's a more inviting, walkable space. So zoning can look at that. It can also kind of regulate things like porches and stoops, which really kind of could contribute to a more walkable nature, if that's what the intent of the district is. So this is just to say that this might be more applicable to one district than another, and that's why these districts have different standards, and we can go into different levels of detail. So zoning, as you saw, it presents in two forms: the map, where you see the district boundaries, and then the ordinance, which is where you look to find all those regulations. So this update is both for the ordinance and the map and how they work together. So you might be wondering, why is New Garden updating the zoning ordinance and map? You have one, we just saw the map, you have the ordinance that goes with it, so why the update now? So New Garden's updating it for a few reasons. So as I mentioned, the comprehensive plan was recently updated about, was it 2018. So, oh my gosh, 6 years ago. That might seem like a while ago, but comprehensive plans are supposed to last around a decade, or guide development for about a 10-year period. So you're kind of within that window and still want to make sure that your laws and policies align with the vision that was set in that plan. So it's not just the comprehensive plan, but it's the Village of Toughkenamon Streetscape Improvement Study, your official map, and all the work that you've been doing with open space preservation. We want to make sure that the zoning aligns with that work and those plans. We also want to address existing challenges with the zoning ordinance and map. We know that there are some challenges maybe in administration of the existing zoning ordinance and map because of kind of frequent requests for variances that are ultimately granted. So when you see a request for a variance, which is like a request to deviate from the existing zoning ordinance, and it's granted, it means that maybe the zoning ordinance should just say, what that request was, why the need for the variance if it's ultimately granted. So we're looking at kind of what are those frequently requested variances, and do they make sense to just integrate into the base language of the code? Where there are kind of inconsistencies between like what's on the ground and that you want to maintain, and what the code and the zoning map says for that area. So we just want to kind of address some of those identified challenges, in addition to responding to the existing needs and trends. Even since 2018, when your comp plan was updated, the world looks a lot different now than when your code was originally written, which actually, I think the full rewrite hasn't been rewritten since the 90s, I believe, completely. There are parts of the code that have been amended and rewritten, but it's good to do kind of a total rewrite to apply to, or to respond to the existing needs and trends, like in housing, for example, in how industry kind of interacts with residential needs, in terms of how people are expressing, ways that they want to live in terms of lifestyle and walkability and having those amenities and services within the township. And then finally, there are some best practices and standards that are either kind of guided by land use law or best practices we've seen in the Commonwealth that we would want to make sure that New Garden is taking advantage of. So those are a few reasons the township is updating the zoning ordinance and code. As I mentioned, these are the existing plans, the comprehensive plan, the Village of Toughkenamon Streetscape and Transportation Improvement Plan, the official map. These are all on your website, and it's something that my team's looking at to make sure that the vision and kind of the policies out of these are integrated into the zoning ordinance. So in addition to some of those challenges I previously discussed, the township identified some additional challenges and needs in their RFP when they put it out. So this is something that I know the Board of Supervisors, Planning Commission have been looking at and thinking about for a while. So this is kind of the list that they came up with. So as we mentioned, there's an excessive amount of maybe non-conforming use on the ground. So what's going on the ground is different than what the code is encouraging. There are a lot of by right agricultural facilities in the township that are in residential districts, which could cause some challenges. There's a reliance on conditional use hearings, which some of us just saw, and a reliance on the zoning hearing board for special exceptions and variances. So we want to, kind of look at those and tune the zoning ordinance so that there isn't that reliance on those mechanisms. There's also a lack of flexibility in terms of adaptive, reuse or implementation of revitalization efforts. So we're looking at potentially like in the village of Toughkenamon. So how do you kind of reuse some of those buildings or along Baltimore Pike to encourage more commercial opportunities rather than that industrial? And right now the code might not permit that as easily. We're also looking at the need for housing and growth. So something the comprehensive plan looked at and that all municipalities are required to look at in their comprehensive plan is meeting the needs of housing, both existing residents, but also anticipated residents. And the township, knowing that, kind of wants to look at these missing middle housing opportunities so that those housing opportunities between that single family home and a block of apartments. So there are duplexes, there are townhouses, there are quadplexes, like 4 units in a building. So looking at how that can be integrated more. Buffering the areas around those agricultural uses, especially when they're close to residential, encouraging mixed use, planned use, and kind of other blended zoning districts. And then aligning the zoning with your existing infrastructure, but then also kind of planned infrastructure needs. Oh, okay, next slide, please. Sorry, I forgot that you were controlling it. So another thing, we mentioned best practices and standards. So we want it to be easy to navigate with a limited number of steps for a developer, for a property owner, for just an interested resident to look at. So easy to use, written in a manner that minimizes like ambiguous language or highly technical language that's not accessible for everyone. We also use illustrations to try to communicate different requirements to aid in that accessibility. So it's something that we want to bring into this. And then as I showed you, that there are these kind of form-based approaches. So ways to look at massing and kind of design standards to encourage an emphasis on the way that the building looks and functions rather than not necessarily the use inside of it. Sometimes the way the form is more important than the use itself. So that's something that we're going to be looking at as well. Next slide. Okay, so what's the process? Slide. So the process will be guided by, so Michael Baker, the consultant team, will be working with the township throughout the process, but it's also guided by a task force of township residents, and then also business owners, representatives of Planning Commission, the school district, as well as Chester County. So I know we have some task force members in the room tonight. If you wouldn't mind just raising your hand. So these folks we're going to be meeting with on a monthly basis. Those meetings will be posted, a recording of those meetings along with the agenda and any of the materials will be posted on the website, which I have a QR code for at the end of the presentation. So we are not creating this in a, an echo chamber. We are working with people that live, work, and recreate here in New Garden Township. And in addition to that task force, as you can see on the right-hand side, we also have 4 public meetings. This one is the first one. We also have one planned for September 25th, which is kind of in our second phase around mapping the zoning districts. So that'll be a really exciting one to attend. And then next year in 2025, there will be 2 additional public meetings so we can fill you in on kind of where we're at with the process, but also so you can provide input on the drafting of some of the chapters. So the process has 4 general phases. The first one, which we're in right now, is just understanding. So this is just understanding the challenges and needs of the township before jumping into the rewrite. So part of this was taking a site tour with township staff. We're working on a diagnosis memo that will clearly outline kind of what we found in your plans and in conversations with the task force and staff, and an analysis of your existing zoning ordinances. What are the existing challenges and opportunities? And then what's currently on the ground. So we know that when we look at that zoning ordinance map, that doesn't tell us what's happening on the ground. So before we start to think about the future districts, we want to understand the existing character. So that's that neighborhood character zones map. So also some feedback we get tonight will be integrated into that diagnosis as well. The second phase is mapping and working on those zoning districts. So we look at what we've learned from the diagnosis and the existing character areas of the township, and start to think about what does the plan, what do the plans, what does staff, the township residents, the task force tell us that they want for their future districts. So we draft up future character zones, which is not a parcel specific map. It's more of a conceptual map, a precursor to the zoning map. And then we get feedback on that and then draw the boundaries of the zoning map, which follow parcels and center lines of the street. At the same time, we're thinking about what's the intent and what are the standards, the bulk and area standard regulations for those districts. So that's what we'll be looking at in September, and we hope you'll join us for that meeting. The third step is drafting of the zoning ordinance articles beyond just the districts. So we're looking at uses, the definition of those uses and the regulations that accompany those uses and where they're permitted, as well as landscaping, the historic ordinance regulations, you have natural resource standards, design standards. So that's all part of that drafting phase. And once we have somewhat of a draft to share or portions of that draft, there will be another opportunity for input prior to the adoption phase, which is when there are public meetings and public hearings before the Planning Commission and your Board of Supervisors for adoption. Something also to mention, the Chester County is part of the task force for this project, and that's also because they will ultimately review the zoning ordinance for consistency with their county-wide plan, but also because the project is partially funded through the Vision Partnerships Program, which is a Chester County grant program. Next slide. Okay, so we'll have an opportunity for a more general kind of question, answer, discussion, but I wanted to get a sense of what your priorities are for the future of New Garden, but specifically the zoning update. So you heard a little bit about what the township's been talking about. Now we want to hear from you. So if you mind going to the next slide. Okay, so I know this is super small, so I'm going to read it out loud, and feel free to just shout out if you don't want to use Mentimeter. But we're back in Mentimeter, and I want to know what your top 3 priorities for this zoning update are. So the options are to support the revite. So I'm just going to read them off. If you agree, you can show of hands kind of to get a sense of where you're at. You can pick 3 priorities. So it's support the revitalization of Toughkenamon, allow for a variety of housing types, encourage mixed-use development near the airport, reduce conflicts between residential and agricultural operations, preserve sensitive environmental resources, and improve the function and appearance and safety of the Route 41 corridor. So with all those, I'm starting to see responses come in on the screen, but for those of you who are not using Menti, how many of you would say that supporting the revitalization of Toughkenamon is a priority for you? I see 4 people that are using Menti. Anyone that's not using? Okay. What about allowing for the variety of housing types? So it seems to be kind of an, okay, so we have another person. What about encouraging mixed-use development near the airport? This is a little lower on here. Any additional support for that? Another higher ranked one is reducing conflicts between residential and agricultural operations. Okay. Preserving sensitive environmental resources. I just see 2. Any additional? I'm kind of interested. Well, actually, I'll go back once we get through. And one of the highest ones too is to improve the function, appearance, and safety of the Route 41 corridor. Additional. So I'm just interested briefly to hear if anyone's willing to share. You know, preserving sensitive environmental resources is kind of the lowest priority of these options. It's still received quite a bit of support, but I'm interested, do you feel, is that maybe because you feel that that's already happening in your existing ordinances or through other policies, or do you just feel like there are other more important needs? Curious. This is just an open conversation. If you feel comfortable. So preserving sensitive environmental resources, that was lower ranked than everything else. And I'm just interested, is that because you feel like it's just not, that it's being taken care of through other mechanisms and that the township's doing a good job on that as it is? I'm just interested as to why that was a lower priority compared to some of the other priorities. Okay.
I agree. I voted.
Thanks.
I ranked that lower as well.
Thanks.
I think we're already covering it.
No, and that's what we want to hear as well. That's interesting. Well, so that tells us that we need that. It's not just what is, what people want to see, but it's also acknowledging what's working now, right? Not everything that we read are challenges, right? There's a lot of, really solid stuff that we'd want to make sure are protected. That's good to know. Great. Does anyone else want to share anything more about why they chose their priority or their 3 priorities? Mm-hmm. Okay. And does that mean in terms of staff or? Oh, okay. Okay. Got it. Sure. No, and that's something we definitely, when we talk about the code being clear and concise, and that's not just for the ease of navigation for the general public or property owners or developers, but it's also making sure that staff can reference articles, that it's very clear, that nothing is vague. So hopefully that will help with that as well. You wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So that kind of brings me to my next question, and you don't need to use Mentimeter if you don't want, but are there any other priorities that were not on that slide that you want to bring up that we should know about? Mm-hmm. Mhm. Absolutely. It's a great point. Anything else? Mhm. That's a great point. And yeah, I should mention it's by looking at the variances and how, why they're granted, we won't do that without nuance, right? There's always what are the potential unintended consequences of this? So that is a great point. Yeah, making sure the zoning and infrastructure complement each other. That's really important. We know that infrastructure is needed to support certain densities and certain types of uses. So making sure that that's considered. And then also, in terms of the roads that you have and that infrastructure and what that can support. It's a great point. Any other priorities that you want to bring up? This is exactly what we want to hear. So thank you for sharing. Okay, commercial development on 41 to reduce the tax burden on residents. So that's right. So something we want to make sure beyond the state requiring that every municipality provide for every type of use. That is a legal thing. I'm not a lawyer, but the MPC does say that you have to accommodate every single use somewhere within the township. So it's not a matter of if there's a use, but where there's a use and where that's most appropriate. And that's, we've heard a lot already about your residential neighborhoods and the character of those neighborhoods and wanting to maintain those areas. So where are the areas that could accommodate additional growth? Potentially along Route 41 and promoting and encouraging commercial development. And by directing that growth and that development in certain areas, you're allowed not only to preserve your residential neighborhoods, but also the rural attributes of your township. That's a great point. Yeah, so another priority about increasing density along corridors to allow working class families to afford to live here. Great point as well. So meeting the needs of existing and anticipated residents. Anything else? Okay. Oh, am I doing that? I guess so. Sorry, I thought you, okay, I have it up on my screen as well, but I didn't know it was connected to that. Okay, so actually I'm gonna go to the next one real quick. Someone mentioned Route 41. So I'm interested. So that was one person's opinion about, increasing commercial growth along Route 41. So what are other people's opinions? Do you think Route 41 should just be preserved as it is, enhanced a little bit, or kind of reimagined and changed? Uh-huh. No. Oh, okay. So I see a lot of enhanced, a couple change. No one so far on Mentimeter has said they want it to stay exactly as it is. Is there anyone that's not using Mentimeter that maybe feels like it should just be preserved as it is? Okay. So I see, and that I was going to be asking kind of what, your thoughts were when you selected that, but in my mind, an enhancement is kind of looking at what's working, if there's anything that's working, kind of using those and encouraging more of that behavior, some additional kind of infill development, whereas a change would be like, let's completely reimagine this corridor. Like nothing really is working right now. There's nothing that we can build upon, so let's reimagine it. So, but I ask you all that question. For those of you that chose enhance, what were you thinking when you chose that answer? What does that mean to you in terms of what you want to see on Route 41 along that corridor? Okay. Okay. Offsite. Sorry, safety issues. Okay. Okay. Got it. So that's all good feedback. While zoning doesn't necessarily dictate aspects like anything that happens in the right of way, form and the way that other zoning regulations can help encourage some of those behaviors. So it's good to know. And then even in terms of providing connections. So it's good to know. What about those who chose changed? What does that vision look like for you? Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. So would you say going through Avondale is kind of the route right now? Is that everyone, no one cuts north on, is it Newark or, okay. Okay. Got it. Any other comments about Route 41? We'll be doing a little bit more of this visioning around these corridors in September, but this is a really helpful baseline for us. Any additional thoughts you want to share? Oh. Okay. Okay. Yes. So, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong in any of these statements, but so the township is updating their Act 209 plan, which is looking at the roads and infrastructure and capacity of those roads and how they function. This is really fortuitous timing because they're doing this at the same time that we're working on the zoning. And as we know, land use can dictate, traffic patterns and amount of people and everything like that. So we are working closely with Bowman, who is a consultant firm selected for the Act 209 update. And sharing, and we will be sharing what we come up with in September regarding kind of the future character zones and zoning district map. And they'll be integrating that into their study. So they're making sure that they're planning and accommodating for any kind of change in anticipated population or traffic for that. Did I cover it?
Also, it's worth mentioning that the Department of Transportation for Pennsylvania is doing a study of Route 41 all through New Garden and surrounding townships too. So that they've come here and presented that as well. So there's a lot going on with Route 41.
That's great. Let's take a look at that. Anything else that you want to talk about with Route 41 right now? Okay, so looking at another kind of area that's talked about a lot in your comp plan and then also in that Village of Toughkenamon streetscape improvement study. This is definitely an area we'll be looking at. It's kind of like your village hub in the township. So when you think about Toughkenamon and that area, do you want it preserved as it is, enhanced, or changed, and what does that mean to you? So for those of you that are selecting or thinking of selecting preserved, can someone share a little bit more about what is existing now that they want to see preserved? Oh, thank you.
I appreciate the architectural heritage, and to go back to what one of the other people was saying, it kind of harkens back to the agricultural history of the township, and I feel like that should be preserved. Obviously, I think a lot of the things that everyone shares is probably going to say about enhancing would be the intersection of Baltimore Pike and Newark Road, and a lot of the businesses make sure that people have a nice place to walk, nice place to live, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Great point. Does anyone else want to share a little bit more about that enhancement? Would you like to see enhanced in the village in addition to walkability? Mm-hmm. Okay. Before what? Before the automobile. Got it. Absolutely. Agreed.
Safer pedestrian access for the entire village, as well as infrastructure enhancements, curbs, stormwater, All those are imperative to be done.
Absolutely.
To add on to that, we have an active, it's lightly used freight line that goes to the town.
Yeah.
And if we could get people to not walk to the Giant with that, that would be super helpful.
Okay, I did not know they were using that.
True.
Anything else with Toughkenamon for the time being? Until, yes. Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, I'm excited about continuing the conversation, not just around those two locations, but some other kind of areas in the township. And that's exactly what we're looking at in September on the meeting on September 25th. So I hope to see you there, and this is perfect timing. You might be wondering how can you stay involved in this process? You're here tonight. Thank you. I hope you continue to stay involved, and not just you, but also sharing this information with your neighbors, with other people that you know in the township. So some easy ways to stay involved. First, bookmark the zoning update project webpage. So you can get to it via the New Garden Township website. There's also a short URL here, or you can use this QR code. That's where we'll be providing updates on a regular basis. So any of those task force meetings I mentioned, the presentation tonight, thank you. Awesome. Yeah, we can show them. You can also sign up to receive email updates from that website. That email list will be used to remind people of upcoming public outreach meetings, maybe when task force meeting minutes are updated. So that's another easy way to stay involved. When the project progresses and there's opportunity to provide feedback on maybe like zoning districts or specific articles, this website also allows us to put up interactive maps and allow you to provide kind of comment on those maps, or maybe comment via short surveys. So this will be kind of the landing page for all of that. If you go to project updates, Chris. So you'll see here, there's not much information right here because we're at the beginning of the process, but this will be an important page to follow. You'll see we had our kickoff meeting with the task force. There's the meeting recording in the slide deck. On the public outreach tab, that's where we'll be sharing any information about these meetings. The flyer, which you can download and share. And then on the resources tab, this is another good one. We'll be updating it as it goes, but all the plans I mentioned tonight, you can find them on the township's website very easily. But for the sake of this zoning update, any plans that we're referencing or resources we'll be putting on this resource page. So be sure to follow that. And then on the contact us tab, that's where you'll get the email for codes@newgarden.org. That's the email address that you can send any questions to or comments, and then sign up to receive project updates. So that's the easiest way to stay involved. And then, as I mentioned, we hope that you attend the public outreach meeting, the second one. This one was really meant to just provide an overview of the process and get initial feedback. The meeting in September on the 25th from 6 to 7 here in this building, you'll be up and moving around. It'll be more workshop style. You'll be helping us put pen to paper and providing feedback. So really, please come out to that and provide feedback. That's like a critical point in the process. Any questions before we wrap up? Yes. It can be more important than use, not always. So in the past few decades, well, I would say the post-war era to maybe like around the 90s, early 2000s, a lot of our zoning codes were written to be what we call Euclidean. Euclidean zoning codes separate uses into different districts. So you have your commercial district, you have your residential district, you have your industrial district. And that's a lot of the development patterns that we see in suburban communities were a result of those Euclidean zoning codes. However, it's, when you go to Kennett Square or Downingtown or, other communities, especially along your main streets, you start to see this mix of uses, right? Even Toughkenamon, right? It was here before your first zoning ordinance was in place. So when we look at zoning codes now, we like to use a hybrid approach. It's partially Euclidean, partially form-based. So understanding that use can be important depending on what that use is, right? We still don't want to put, polluting industrial uses next to schools or residences. But we also see that that the strict kind of commercial residential divide isn't always appropriate for every district. So there might be some districts like in your mixed use village or in the village of Toughkenamon, for example, or along corridors where we might want to encourage a mix of uses rather than that strict separation. However, what we also want to make sure is that the form of those uses is compatible, right? So that there's a consistent look and feel to that area, right? Whether it is a a duplex or a coffee shop on the bottom with apartments on top. So that's what form is important in those mixed use situations.
Just a point of clarification. So for the zoning rewrite, this is going to deal with the land use portion, not more specific to the stormwater ordinance and the natural resource protection ordinance. They will somewhat remain as is, correct?
So the natural resources article is part of your zoning ordinance now. So we will be looking at that and how it can be integrated. However, some of the regulations maybe around stormwater or other kind of site, land development or subdivision kind of development related regulations fall into your SALDO, your subdivision and land development ordinance. We find a lot of times when looking at municipalities' ordinances that there's a lot of overlap. You obviously want your zoning code to be speaking to your SALDO, your subdivision and land development ordinance, but sometimes it gets a little mixed up and there's things in the SALDO that should be in the zoning and vice versa. So it's something that we're going to be looking at. This is specifically a zoning ordinance update, but we would flag if the township is interested in doing a SALDO update in the future, these are things that you will want to consider based on the zoning ordinance.
Right. And then we also fall under the Chester County Stormwater Ordinance, which
Yes.
we have not granted a waiver for that. So, since that's a different statute, so we would have to comply with both of those.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
And so to add on to that, will you also be looking into folding in the historic ordinance to?
So this is something, a conversation we'll be having with the task force and the township more, because your zoning ordinance does have a historic preservation article. And then there, if I'm remembering correctly, there's another chapter for the historic commission. So we want to understand how those relate and looking at that. But we also don't want to overstep that other chapter. So it's something that we're going to look into. I don't have an answer about how exactly it's going to mesh in, but I was able to attend the conditional use hearing before this meeting, and it's very interesting to hear, and we'll certainly want to hear more about historic preservation and views on that, because that can be through kind of historic preservation protections, but also through some of those that design and form-based regulations as well. So, thank you. Yes. Sure. Absolutely, I agree with that. Yes, and we have a lot of, the township has shared that and the county has shared that. Absolutely. Yeah, we will get that updated in the resources and, link to it from the homepage. It's a great point. Okay, any other questions or thoughts before we close out? In 30 seconds. So it wouldn't be, we're allowing one bill, because the zoning district standards apply to the district, right? So it's not parcel by parcel. We won't say this parcel is going to be treated completely different from the parcel next to it. However, there will be consideration about how it is consistent and compatible with the surrounding area. So for example, and I, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, exactly if that's where we're headed with the apartment in R1. That might not be appropriate when we look at infrastructure, when we look at the compatibility of the area, but we'd be looking at, there would be standards around height, around how many units, square footage, where on the property it can be. So there's a lot that goes into the regulations around certain uses and districts. Does that help a little bit? So the zoning map that exists, we are updating that zoning map. So most likely, and this is what we'll be working on in September, those districts will look different, might have different names and standards and regulations that go along with it. It doesn't mean that the existing regulations will change in every single district, but we are doing a full map rewrite and update. However, as I mentioned, something that we have heard, and this is the last thing I'll say, and we can continue the conversation in September, is that, the residential areas in New Garden are really treasured and valued, and stable, right? So we want to make sure that we are preserving what is stable and valued and treasured, and then enhancing and, maybe changing some of the areas that need a little more love or have more potential. So this is not, while the map will be rewritten or redrawn, it doesn't necessarily mean everything within those districts will be redrawn. It just might look a little different. So, okay, with that, thank you very much for coming out. We will see you in September, and I'll stick around if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.